Leslie.
And the next request we have is from Alison Murphy, the Local Association Secretary from the Educational Institute of Scotland.
Welcome. Whenever you're ready, just...
Thank you very much. I've set myself a bit of a task here, which I may regret, because having listened to some extremely well put together, extremely articulate speeches, what I'm going to try and do is actually respond to some of the things that I've heard. So I'm going to be doing this a bit on the fly, so patience please. But it's been really interesting to listen to what people have been saying and to hear the contributions. And I think the standard of contributions from parents, this is the first time I've done an event like this, the standard of contributions from the parents has been superb, and very much from the pupils as well. I'm here to try and add something from the teacher voice and to try and share as far as possible the views of teachers in the schools, and very much trying to speak for teachers in all the schools, as well as kind of the considered view of the EIS as an organisation. Overwhelmingly from the members who've spoken to me, there's real favour for option one. And the obvious reason for this very much matches the EIS view nationally when it looks at school closures or school mergers or changes in catchment areas, which obviously is something that across the country is happening a lot, which is that it's essential that schools are seen as being in the heart of their communities and that decisions need to be made, as exactly has been said again and again, on basis for education, on basis of community service, on basis of provision for the pupils, and funding really, while not irrelevant, can't trump those. And I think we've seen the importance of these particular schools in the hearts of their communities from the passion of what people have been saying about this. But why is it that EIS feels that this is so important, that it's essential that schools are in the hearts of communities? Because that's well known that that's one of the best ways of raising attainment, of maintaining high attainment where it exists, of promoting equity, of challenging the attainment gap. As I said, our parents are already testament to the passion of how well these schools regard in their communities. First thing is, it is the community role that's important. The assumption that simply by making larger schools bigger, you're going to improve things, we would challenge. There were some quotes in the report, such as new schools will help maximise opportunities to attain and achieve. Larger schools are better placed to meet, maybe better placed to meet educational needs. Larger schools, better staff collaboration. We challenge those as inherent in simply a larger school. I think it's already become very clear that actually it's the nature of the individual school that makes the real difference. There was discussion, I think earlier mentioned at Portobello, how a very large school works really well with its pupils. Well, absolutely, but I'm sure if you talk to anyone in Portobello, it would tell you that it takes years to develop those kind of systems. You've got those systems in schools already. In your free schools that exist, you have already got incredibly strong teaching and learning that matches the needs of those pupils. If you want to close the schools, so close some of those schools, merge others, create new schools, you're going to have to build those systems from scratch. And that's a huge ask. I mean, to quote from Edinburgh's own equity in learning document, the sorts of things that really help promote equity in learning are things like know your children, being in the community, being aware of adverse childhood experiences. Again, from the same document, things that really promote closing the attainment gap, parental involvement programmes, children working together in small groups, nurture groups. These are things that exist already. And if you create new schools, you will have to build those. And building those takes huge amounts of time, it takes huge amounts of effort. There was discussion about the mergers. And there was talk in the document, and it's been mentioned a couple of times today, about successful mergers happened. There was one that was mentioned going back to, I think, 1991 from Broughton High School. When it merged, one of my members gave me some documents from some news reports around the time that it happened, where there was, absolutely, it did work. But, as it said here, quotes from Alistair Darling back in the day, we should remember that in addition to developing new courses, it's necessary to maintain existent courses during the changeover period. That inevitably means that more resources are required. Another one here from another who was actually the chair of the Education Committee at the time. Okay, Elizabeth Manguinness, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Of course, it has not all gone smoothly. It would be unfair to pretend otherwise. Yes, there have been problems with the buses and increase in truancy. Both of these have been tackled positively and will, I'm confident, be successfully resolved. I would like to work, everyone has worked so hard to secure change in a situation which had potential to go wrong. I mean, all through these articles, people are talking about how difficult it was. It worked, but it was really hard. It took a long time. Equally, there's quotes from Bishopbriggs High School, which resulted from a merger there, but I haven't yet had a chance to contact my opposite number in Eastern Bartonshire to actually get a real sort of flavour for how that went. But I've certainly talked to one or two people who know that area and said that, yes, it has now worked very well, but again, it took huge amounts of time. It was very difficult. It was much more traumatic than people perhaps recognise. With the additional points that happened in, I think, approximately 2008, this happened in the early 90s. If we're looking to create new schools and create this new merger now, which will require extra resource, we're doing this at a time in the most incredible challenge in education. School resources are already stretched, in some cases beyond breaking point. Staff are already absolutely on the edge. And then adding this extra challenge without really resourcing it well, that is going to be really difficult. So it is not that this is impossible, but it is very, very, very hard. So again, I would say you need to be very, very clear that the advantages are going to outweigh the costs of losing your schools that are in the hearts of these communities. A few other things that people touched on, but I perhaps want to just emphasise. There was talk about the curricular offer. And again, there's been some discussion about the larger schools may enhance curricular choice. Again, there is certainly absolutely that potential, but we'd also make the point that, as we said here, if you look at Education Scotland's HMA Summary of Inspection Reports from sort of 2012 to 2016, 11 secondary schools in Scotland were rated as very good or above for the curriculum. 3 of those schools had rolls over 1,000, 7 others ranged from 248 to 921. In other words, there isn't a direct correlation between size of school and curricular choice. It can help, but equally, there are other imaginative solutions that can work. And again, it would say, according to this, the Edinburgh school currently rated very good for curricular choice has one of the smaller roles. So in and of itself, simply increasing school size doesn't do enough to widen curricular choice. Some other points I want to try and pick up on and amplify. There's been discussion about WEC. One of the things that was mentioned earlier, and we were asked, one of the lady from WEC was asked about, was about pupils who are going to WEC. Again, the schools in Edinburgh that serve some of the most significantly deprived areas do have a problem with attached. I mean, all those schools would say they don't always attack their catchment area, but one of those attracts about 43% of the catchment population go there. Another, at the moment, attracts 16% of its catchment area. WEC, approximately 40% of its catchment population goes. And this is after WEC's already been threatened with closure in 2007. And when a school's threatened with closure, it takes a very long time to rebuild that kind of community spirit. And it is entirely to WEC's credit that it has managed to do that. I've been trying to go to the schools where this has been affected. I've very recently taken up this post. It was one of the first things I did. And in all the schools, the passion with which the teachers talked about the pupils was incredibly moving. But it was really interesting to hear in WEC, because what you heard teachers talking about individual pupils. You heard teachers talking about the incredible work that they were doing to support pupils in some of the most challenging circumstances. A friend from Woodlands, the lady from Woodlands, spoke about all that's done in Woodlands to service really vulnerable students. But as she touched on, as I want to emphasise, every school has vulnerable pupils, but we'll all acknowledge that WEC has some of the kids who are some of the most vulnerable as well. And in that small school, outreach officers who will go out to the communities and actually be able to speak to parents, teachers who are constantly trying to ensure that the children in school. I was talking to one teacher who talked about how in guidance they'd actually helped try the parents to source a washing machine so that the kids could be coming into school in clean uniform. You have a small staff who really, really know the children. And that, all the evidence is that is probably the single most essential thing in building, building attainment, raising attainment, closing the equity gap, is really key relationships between pupils and teachers. And that exists. It exists in all these schools, but my God, does it exist in WEC. And there's so much that they do there. There was also discussion about closing the attainment gap, and again, several of my members were quite disturbed about, or disturbed made wrong, but they were querying some of the data in the report. For example, the report very much highlights S4 data. Fair enough, but as already been mentioned, it would be really useful to see some of the insight data. But I've got breakdowns here where they talk about actually looking at leaver initial destinations, positive destinations from Curry, 95, over 95%, but from WEC, nearly 88% of students initial high positive destinations. That's an incredibly important statistic. You have other things that say, instead of simply looking at the S4, let's look at a much broader range. I'm not going to read out pages and pages, but I think you've said you're going to take more data. So again, happily give you some of the queries where people have said from both these schools, actually, attainment can be good for the kids that they're serving. You've got some really strong attainment. I think all I want to kind of do beyond there is try and pick up a few of the other things that I think have been said and try and amplify them. Again, in WEC, we talked about what had happened, things like the creche that was there. You've got a real chance there to redevelop some of those things that were put back in. If you look to refurbish the school, really try and improve some of those facilities, but also in some of the others, really build on those sorts of things. One of the most important things I think you had as well was a quote when you were asking the pupils, what did they think? And you had one who said, I think two of them said the big problems are going to be, looking forward, they're really worried about the disruption due to the building. Absolutely. And that it's really important that teachers are knowing the young people. Again, these are really important factors to be taken into account. If you do go for some of the proposals that involve closures and mergers, you will have those disruptions for years. You will have the uncertainty in the schools now going on for years. And again, I've already had members speak to me where there's anecdotal evidence of parents already considering withdrawing their pupils from schools looking for other schooling. That will go on for years. There's also a query about how many. It may be said that perhaps some of the timeframes are perhaps a little optimistic as to how well some of this can happen, how well some of the buildings will actually be completed. Perhaps we've got some experience of that, perhaps not always going exactly to plan over the last few years. So again, there is some scepticism of that around that. And even once the new buildings are in place, we do have issues around development and, snagging, how well are these buildings actually being designed, how much, how well can we actually fix problems that are identified. So there are huge concerns amongst teachers about how that system will work as well. Over the next few weeks, you've said you've got 6 weeks for further submissions. I think it's really important that there's consultation with teacher voice. When I was outside waiting to come in here and was talking to people, a lot of people are saying that they feel really worried that there hasn't been the opportunity for teachers to put their points of view forward. Now, we can appreciate that there are all sorts of very good reasons around this. But at the same time, you do have an expert level with the teachers, and I would really urge you over the next 6 weeks to ensure that you are listening to teachers in all those establishments, getting their views on how these proposals should move forward. trying to ensure that they are able to be able to speak to you. I know you've gone into some of the schools, but I'm not certain that actually the teachers in all the schools have had a chance to speak to the people who are actually going to be making this decision, and I think that's incredibly important. Also, the pupil voice. I mean, it was great to hear the kids from Curry, but I think it's really important that we are supporting the pupils from other schools to do this as well. So again, we need to be making it really clear that we want to be hearing the pupil voice. The pupils in WEC can speak really articulately, if they're supported to do that, about what they have. So I do hope that over the next 6 weeks, that will be a real priority from you, is speaking to pupils and speaking to teachers to be able to hear what their views are. As I say, I think, yes, what I've tried to do is pick up on the things that have been said already and kind of maybe amplify them, but I do urge you, as I say, members generally are saying option one, keep schools at the heart of their community, maintain the excellent provision that you have already, build on that. It is the relationships, it's far more important the size of the school. It is building on that expert provision that you have. So please, that would be our urging, go for option one. Thank you.
Just a point of information, you may have not caught up with this yet, but we are going to consult with the teaching profession.
No, absolutely.
And the reason we didn't do it previously is because we wanted to give the teachers sight of the options that was discussed with local community rather than have a general discussion with them. So we are going to do that.
No, I do appreciate you had said that already, and I'm just saying I think that's extremely welcome. And the idea that 6 more weeks for submitting further is really important. I suppose, again, it's simply about ensuring that that's across the piece for the whole school's estate. Thank you.
Well, the intention would just be to do the schools that are affected.
Yeah, no, sorry,
yes. Rather than a larger exercise, because we're going to give them the options.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Okay.
You talk about we've talked about the capital cost, and you talk about the additional resource costs that are going to be required to re-implement some of the support systems that are currently in place in various schools. Have you an idea how much additional that is?
Honestly, no, but I would imagine very large. I mean, certainly if you're talking about schools which are merged, so you're talking about taking very often very different schools and trying to merge them, you're going to need to look at probably instituting some sorts of house systems, which will probably need much more guidance input than we currently have. I mean, at the moment, guidance caseloads are very, very high. I think trying to do the sort of work you'd need to do on community building with teachers, guidance teachers who have the current caseloads that happen across the Edinburgh school estate would be almost impossible. So you'd need to be looking at having extra guidance teachers. You'd certainly need over the first few years to be looking at all sorts of extra additional support around PSAs and others, very much to support those students with the higher tariffs who really react poorly to change. We've already touched on the fact that you'd have children travelling very big distances. You'd have to be looking at that. I mean, even things as simple, it's not simple at all if you're the person having to do it. Uniforms. You're going to have schools created where you've got people, so you're going to want to create a new uniform. You're going to have families where they're going to have to be looking at that. That's a huge expense. That's another barrier. So do I have a quantitative idea? No, but just in those 2 minutes, those are 3, 4, 5 different things that I can think that are going to be major costs at a time when we don't have that money. This is the real problem, I think. Doing this at any point is very hard. Doing it at the moment when we are just stretched beyond capacity already, you know, it's a terrifying prospect.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Which has been discussed quite a lot in this argument, is that and one of in the closing the gap here, which you've challenged because you don't think the evidence we've got is correct, and what we'll say to you is if you have other evidence you need to show us. But it isn't quite interesting what you're saying, and one of the closing attainment gaps says that a social mix in a school will raise attainment. Are you saying that a comprehensive solution to this problem will not work?
No, but what I'm saying is, and I think there's a fair amount of experience of this in schools mean, I came from London, obviously, is simply putting a bunch of people from very different backgrounds in a school and thinking that in and of itself will close the attainment gap is a recipe for disaster. And again, the experience in London where you had huge social mix but huge ethnic mix was it took a huge amount of work. If you look at the stuff that was done around the London Attainment Challenge, it was around supporting so that that social mix or that cultural mix or the huge diversity in school becomes a strength. That is something that that can be done, but it takes massive amounts of management. And just putting a group of people in one building will not achieve that. And it has to, and again, the social mix has to be weighed alongside things like, and again, fair amount of evidence, some which we can try and put together and document for you, around such things like smaller class sizes, around building social capital in different ways. So no, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things we absolutely, as EIS, we are fundamentally committed to comprehensive education. As someone who went to an extremely comprehensive school myself, I can see all the advantages. You want as diverse a range as possible, but it needs to be done in a very structured, resourced, properly managed way.
And you don't think we can achieve that in this situation?
I don't think simply putting these schools, effectively closing WEC and Curry and putting them together to increase the social mix. Great, it increases your social mix, but it costs you a huge amount of other things that are also beneficial. So it's about weighing your gains and your losses. Social mix, absolutely, is when well managed, when well resourced, preferably also when arising naturally, is something that's incredibly positive. But in order to achieve that social mix, you're going to effectively rip the cart out of two communities. Surely a much better thing is one would hope that organically over years you might actually achieve a better social mix by in fact doing things to challenge the deprivation in WEC. Surely that's the best way of improving your social mix is by actually getting a better social mix in WEC, not hunting the kids from WEC.
How do you suggest we do that with parental choice?
Well, I would say first of all it is largely about making fully resourced to do all that it can do to the best. It's also about much wider choices you are making in Edinburgh as a whole around your housing mix. As you have a community that's producing kids that are getting the best positive outcomes, you would hopefully ensure that they're going to be then supported to be economically regenerating that entire area. What about building sort of community resource hubs so that those kids are supported in enterprise initiatives? What about getting those kids starting small businesses, therefore making WEC itself a more desirable area? I mean, that's how you're going to challenge that, is by making sure that people are wanting to live in WEC. These aren't quick and easy solutions. They take time.
WEC is full. I mean, the Western Hales, there's no shortage of that it's full in Western Hales. I'm just very interested, as a teacher of EIS representing teachers, that you are suggesting to me, and this is the way you're arguing to me, that we cannot have a comprehensive solution to this in terms of the proposals we're having here. And you seem to be saying, yes, that's fine, but there's too many disadvantages here, so therefore you conclude we can't have a comprehensive solution.
Well, first of all, I'd query, when you say we can't have a comprehensive solution, first of all, I wouldn't say that at all. When you say you want a comprehensive school, and when the EIS says a comprehensive school is a school that in its community serves the entirety of its community. Yes? Is that our premise, or are you saying that? What's your definition of a comprehensive school?
Your argument to me is that when we're saying we're closing the attainment gap, one of the arguments and crucial bit of closing the attainment gap is in a comprehensive system you have a social mix, and that closes the attainment gap. You're questioning that, and clearly we need to know that, because if that is the case,
no, I would chat. Right, okay, right. That helps. That challenge the premise of it. No, I am not saying. There's nothing about the fact that if you amalgamated the two schools, that the social demographic would be much broader. There is nothing around that in and of itself that would be a bad thing. It is the fact that by amalgamating those two schools, you are basically taking two communities where those two schools exist. They are serving their local communities very, very, very well. You take those two schools, meld them together. Yes, you may have a broader demographic, but that is being done in a way that's quite an artificial way. I'm losing the thread of my argument now. So I think it's the premise of the social mix is the driver. Social mixing can be really, really, really productive. But first of all, it needs to be something that happens as part of a community school. I mean, it's the very fact that these are called community schools is a really important thing. And that's what you need. And it's also, I suppose, the thing they're saying is what you're looking at doing is doing a very, very sudden, merger as opposed to a development. So again, I think it's that premise of those are in a way more comprehensive. I think that's the bit we perhaps are challenging. These are schools in their communities. If they're schools in their communities, that makes them comprehensive schools. Because a comprehensive school is a school that includes everyone in its community.
Thank you, Kavina. I just wanted to wade into this. I do feel that you were slightly misrepresented by the convener. My understanding of a comprehensive school is it's a school that doesn't select, that takes the intake from its local community. And I think we've seen from all three schools, and including the special schools, a slightly different case, that they are comprehensive schools. And I think we need to be very clear here to these communities. If we are saying that we are moving forward with proposals to close schools and merge schools because we want them to be more socially diverse, that needs to be on the table. Or are we saying that there's going to be distinct educational benefits?
51 of the report says the opinion which involves this opinion which involves an expanded and more socially mixed catchment area would bring benefits to those living. So the social mix in terms of a catchment, right? So that, in terms of that, what you're saying is this option brings the social mix. And it brings these, and what's been suggested by yourself and others is that this is not true. So we need to see the evidence that says this will not work. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so just a quick supplementary on that. What I'm saying is that I understand that's in the report. I understand that there can be benefits from greater social diversity. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that we need to be very clear, the evidence that exists within these communities, we need to be very clear that, as the deputation has said, the disadvantages, the huge challenges that come from such a move would be outweighed by the benefits of that social diversity, and I am not convinced that that is the case.
That's absolutely right, and that's what's been said, and that's what's been said in the other bits of it. What I'm trying to tease out, right, from the teacher's representative, right, is what the claim she's making about it, and that's all I'm saying.
Okay.
In terms of it. But anyway, there's Alison, you want to come in?
Okay, where to begin? Okay, so Alison, from just a question. I get around, and slightly connected here as well, but I get around a lot of head teachers now, and you'll know the kind of challenges we're faced. You know the challenges teachers are facing.
Absolutely.
Head teachers are, a lot of head teachers are mentioning about the whole kind of inclusion into mainstream. Schools are kind of, there's schools are very much those communities. It's holistic. No one is ever, any good educator knows it's not a matter of moving children into a building without the support and infrastructure. But we're quite away from that. Also, what's presented as well to me is the fact of we have buildings that are not fit. For the future, and as politicians here, we have to think about if we are going down a holistic, educational environment for the future potential of all of our children, and that it's very much an inclusive environment. It's holistic. The family support workers you mentioned are getting rolled out in lots of schools. It's there's all the breadth of opportunity. There's the everything that's going into the schools right now. So, but our learning environments are not fit for it. So, I think what I'm saying to you is, you can understand. Are you understanding where politicians are coming from in terms of having to look at, the buildings that we need to deliver? Head teachers are raising that with us, and also schools often feel as if they're being left to do everything. So. much more partnership working is going to be needed in the days ahead, but the spaces are not there. So there's a lot of issues on the table, I think, if we're supporting the policy of an inclusive agenda and a holistic agenda in education. That's a very long question, very sorry.
Well, it's a question about how we'd manage it as a bill. I'm kind of lost the
in
question.
In terms of, we're about addressing a situation of rising roles across the whole of Edinburgh, a future-proofing inclusion. How do we do that with all the different buildings and so on?
Well, I think from the views of a lot of the members that I've been speaking to is very much around going for your option one, where you're looking at refurbishing, extending, new school, but those buildings could be made very much fit for the 21st century. In and of itself, simply a new building it's lovely, as I think as one of the earlier speakers was saying. It's great to get a new building, but it needs with all the other things that go with it. And again, we keep coming back to the fact that you have schools at the core and heart of their community. So what we need to be looking to do is to make those buildings within the community they exist in better for the purpose. Now, again, I am no expert in the particular schools. This is why, again, I think over the next few weeks, you're speaking to the school people in the individual schools. But I've certainly spoken to people in WEC who've talked about the way that WEC does a lot in the building that's a lot better than it was, and there's further things that could be done there. There's been some pretty imaginative ideas. Certainly, again, Balerno, there's already been discussion about things that could be done there. The Curry estate, I believe what the options are around the rebuild of Curry. We've already said that Woodlands is a fairly new school, so that's a really important one, that you've got a new build there, 10 years old. If you take Curry away from where it is now, what do you do with that Woodlands estate? So again, these are also questions that need to be looked at. But there are ways of managing each of those buildings. I think that if you speak to the staff in those buildings, they'll be able to give you some fairly detailed feedback about ways that could be done. I've certainly heard lots of different ideas. Could I, off the top of my head now, recite some of them? Probably not. But I guarantee you, when you meet with the WEC staff, they'll be able to talk to you about things that can be done in that building on that site that really would absolutely future-proof it and develop it. They're very confident about that. So again, as you speak to them, they'll be able to talk about those sorts of things, because they've absolutely done so to me. Sorry. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Convener, and thank you for your deputation. Along similar lines to Councillor Dickey, I should explain I'm also the Council's Equalities champion. And my concern is that the older buildings, when being refurbished, are not subject to the same rigorous legislation as new buildings are in terms of the planning regulations, because all buildings under planning regulations, new buildings, must be accessible in the interest of equality. But does that apply to refurbished buildings in the same way?
Well, certainly my understanding is that a lot of the new... Okay, speaking as someone who, previous to this, was working in Fir Hill, where half the building nearly fell on our heads, we have scepticism about the new builds and the quality of the new builds. But certainly we've done within the schools, with the parts of those schools that were refurbished, when they were being refurbished, absolutely. Lifts have been put in, huge amounts of work have been done. Now, in some schools there will be difficulties, but again, I think in most cases there have been ways of challenging it. But absolutely, we'd certainly agree. That provision is absolutely crucial. But I'm not aware of reasons why any of those schools couldn't be made. In fact, I'm not aware that those schools aren't currently fairly well accessible. I'm pretty sure there are things that are happening in all those schools that already ensure that you have a great degree of accessibility. And I'm sure that there are ways that we found to make all of them improve anything.
One convener. I think what you're really saying is you don't know. And I think, no, but you don't actually, that's clear from what you just said. So I think, convener, obviously no one's able to answer that question just now, so this is a subject for future discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should investigate that as part of the final report.
Yeah, and we'd absolutely support that.
Okay, any other questions?
I just want to make it absolutely clear that from the EIS point of view, In no way, shape or form, in any way, are we saying anything other than comprehensive education is absolutely, we are totally, utterly and completely committed to it. It is one of the, it is one of our fundamental principles. It is an incredibly good thing. All I am saying at this point is that, exactly as I think I've said by the others, a comprehensive school is a school that serves its community. That is what we are saying. And these are schools that are serving their local communities extremely well. And the teachers in those schools want to continue to serve those communities to the absolute best of their ability. That is really essential. But in no way do I want anyone walking out here thinking that in any way is either I as an individual or the EIS as an organisation saying that we are not supporting comprehensive education. We absolutely are. We are thoroughly committed to it.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So that takes us on to the final section of the agenda. We have 4 requests from community councils this afternoon to address the committee. The first one is from Richard Henderson, who's the chair of Balerno Community Council.